Hey everyone, good morning, good evening. I'm Nishagni, and this is Nishagni Tarot, where you receive inspired insights to create an empowered life. So, welcome. Today, I just thought I'd have just a normal chat with all of you about a book that I read, and or rather, a series that I read. And this is just a completely impromptu, unplanned video that I just decided to make right now because this series is something that's really close to my heart, and I've wanted to read this for a really long period of time. And this is just gonna be an impromptu chat. Let's see where this takes us. I don't know. And let me know if you read this. Let me know if you want to read this. All right, let's get started. So the series that I want to talk to you about today is the critical edition translation of the Valmiki Ramayana. Now, if you've seen my previous books and tarot review called Valmiki's Women, now that was a interpretation of the Ramayana. Now, and if you read Devdutt Patnaik's Sita, that's again an interpretation of the Ramayana. Similarly, the Forest of Enchantments by Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni, Sita's Sister by Kavita Kane, and a couple of other books that are out there, or Asura by Anand Neelkantha. So all of these are just interpretations of the Ramayana, and the difference between translation and interpretation, or rather, I would say direct translation and interpretation, is an interpretation is a spin-off that you write, or rather your personal rendition of a particular story. So the Ramayana has always been considered as the fight between good and evil, and between the civilized and the wild, and about taming and tempering all those evil forces in the world that debilitate us, that make us go outside of our dharma. So dharma is the duty that you have towards society. That is, each of us has a predestined role to play in this world, and dharma is about fulfilling that role, fulfilling the duty that you have towards society. Now, the Ramayana is about how King Rama defeats Ravana, who is the Rakshasa king, and kills Ravana, and establishes dharma again in the world, gets rid of the evilness in the world, and ensures that peace and prosperity thrives. Now, all the other interpretations, I've been someone I am a practicing Hindu, and I love reading my my religious epics, which is the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And I've been reading the Ramayana ever since I've been a baby. I've heard stories from my grandparents, I've heard my mother recounting these stories, I've seen the Ramayana televised, and I've read multiple interpretations of the Ramayana. So I really wanted to go back to the start, or rather, whatever is considered to be the start today. And that was in the form of reading the critical editions of the Ramayana. Now, the critical edition in India, what you need to remember is that the critical edition technically refers to the oldest existing manuscript of a particular religious text that is currently available today. Now, the Ramayana is expected to be, according to historians, so recently historians have really started looking into what the Ramayana is, or the timeline of these epics too, and to kind of map the geographies and the timelines to make sure that there's some sort of a definitive historical record, right? So one of the things that has come up is that the Ramayana was expected to be codified in written format through, or rather I would say around 4,500 years ago, right? So what this means is there was the narration of the Ramayana prior to 4,500 years ago as well, but the codified written format of the Ramayana started around that time. And even in those editions, since still majority of the process was just about narrating from a sage to their disciples and to future generations, it was all done, and since people didn't know how to read, everything was still done in the form of singing poems in honor of the Ramayana, or telling the stories as bedtime stories by grandmothers to grandchildren. So that was how it was passed on. So even there, over the years, over the centuries, the iterations of the Ramayana kept changing over and over again. And finally, what existed, or rather the oldest surviving manuscript that we have today, is what we call the critical edition. A couple of years ago, I had the privilege and the opportunity to acquire the critical editions of the Ramayana in English translation by a very respected translator and politician whose name is Bibek Debroy. Now, the critical edition, which is located in the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, it is in Sanskrit. And unfortunately, I don't know Sanskrit yet. I am planning to learn though, because I do want to read the critical edition in Sanskrit. So the next best thing for me was to get the English translation, and luckily Bibek Debroy has been one of the key people who has been translating the critical edition into English so that it becomes more accessible to the public. And so recently I completed reading the critical edition of the Ramayana. In fact, it was just today morning I completed reading it, and that's why I really felt called to talk to you about it. So I'm going to show you this right here. So here are the critical editions of the Ramayana, if you can see them. The Ramayana, what you need to remember is that it's a very long poem. So the poem is divided into different segments, and each book deals with a couple of the segments. So the first one deals with a few, the second one deals with the next set, and the final segment of the book deals with the last sections of the Ramayana. Now, after reading all of these, there's just so much wisdom to unpack over here. I do heartily recommend this series to everyone. So one of the reasons that I recommend this series or reading critical editions is because it really allows you to tap into and hone into the cultural heritage that we come from. Now, if you are an Indian, whether you're living in India or outside of India, you would have very likely, especially if you're a Hindu, you would have very likely grown up listening to the Ramayana. And over time, and very regional differences do exist, because a lot of poets really took inspiration from the Ramayana to create a lot of ballads and sagas and spin-off stories. And over time, because of regional differences, the story sort of changed in many places. So, for example, did you know, so the Ramayana is also a really important epic in Nepal, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, and many other places of Southeast Asia. And this is mainly because the ancient India constituted a large part of Southeast Asia and the entire part of South Asia. So there were multiple countries that, if we look at today, were part of India. Ancient India, which was called Bharata. So if you consider, for example, in the Sri Lankan edition of the Ramayana, Ravana is considered to be the father of Sita, and Mandodari, Ravana's wife, who would have been Sita's mother, gives her away because there is a prophecy which says that Sita would be the destruction of her father. Now, if you look at the Indian, that is current India's edition of the Ramayana, there is no blood relation between Ravana and Sita at all. Ravana is the Asura king and Sita is the queen. So there are a lot of these really amazing regional differences that are there in the interpretations of the Ramayana. Now, reading the critical edition allows you to go back into the narrative that was championed in the ancient times, especially during the times when this epic was actually written. And it allows you to look at the epic from a different perspective, that is from a purist perspective, I would say. And the reason I use the word purist is because I'm trying to allow you to think about how it would be if you would consider all of your myths, all of your folk tales from the origin standpoint, that everything has a certain origin, and it's really fascinating to look at the origin of your cultural nuances, your epics, your stories, and to look at what ancient people, that is your ancient community, in this case ancient Indians, consider to be values of goodness, values of morality, and values of immorality, for example. So I really found the critical edition to be wonderful in that. So the text is a direct word for word translation of the Sanskrit which is written in the critical edition. So you would literally find every single mistake that is there in the critical edition also in this translation, which I found was really amazing. And I was really happy that Bibek Debroy, who's the translator, actually retained these mistakes as well. So when I talk about mistakes, just consider this. There are basically 26,000 shlokas in the Ramayana. So a shloka is like a mantra or like a hymn, you could say, which is sort of spoken or sung, and each shloka can vary in length, can be short, or it could be really long as well. So there are 26,000 shlokas in the Ramayana, right? So just imagine if you are an author or a narrator who has learned this song from your ancestors and you are penning it down. There's bound to be some mistakes that happen, right? You could get confused, you could make mistakes with the names, there could be spelling errors, factual errors. The same story that was repeated before might be different if once repeated at a later stage. So there's a lot of things can happen. So it shows so much of the humanity of the composers of this poem. And that's really important because, especially when I look at from the Ramayana perspective, the Ramayana is considered to be a ballad of the god, right? And because Rama, if you have again watched my previous Valmiki's Women Books and Tarot review, you will remember that I spoke about how the Ramayana was, or rather how King Rama was actually considered as a god in India, and his wife Sita is the goddess. So we look at the Ramayana as a religious text as opposed to a work of creativity which has been written by humans. And by reading this critical edition, these three books, and by looking at all these small errors and misinterpretations and so on, it's just really wonderful to see the human aspect and element behind such a hugely really intimidating epic, which is considered to be extremely divine in its proportions, right? And another thing that was really wonderful was that to learn about the nuances of Sanskrit language, because although the author does not, or rather the translator Bibek Debroy, limits the use of Sanskrit in the book, he does mention how the play of words happen in Sanskrit and why the English language structure is the way it is. Because some sentences just don't make sense if you look at it from an English perspective. But again, that's because English is such a limited language, right? English is limiting. English does not have a lot of words that exist in indigenous languages. English does not have the rhythm and meter that is possessed by many indigenous languages, Sanskrit included. So Sanskrit is a very, very poetic, beautiful, soulful language that really makes you, brings tears to your eyes and joy to your heart. So that's the kind of language it is, and it's got so many amazing play on words, a lot of phrases that are quite literally play on words. So if you read it in Sanskrit, that's where the joy really lies. So although the usage of Sanskrit was very limited, it was a real joy to see how the translator really explained in the footnotes about what the actual Sanskrit phrase was and why this is really funny because of the play on words. And another thing that I really loved was the description. So any Hindu text that you would read, you would find that is just replete with descriptions, because we are a very expressive lot as a country as a whole. So you would find a lot of the descriptions of the forest, the birds, the trees, all of them are brought in, and this absolutely beautiful, this little celebration of nature. So that's something I really liked. And I really enjoyed reading this book. A couple of things that I really did notice was that as the story progresses, you can see a visible shift between what is considered moral and what is considered immoral. And again, this really speaks to how there has been a timeline difference between narrators and writers. Because like I said, now according to historians, the Ramayana is 4,500 years old. But again, since the research is still going on, it could be much, much older. It could even predate Hindu religion. Nobody knows. That is codified Hindu religion. I'm not talking about the pre-codification Hindu religion, which was basically about, which included yoginis and the, really just focusing and celebrating the natural elements of the world, the sculptures, right? So you can really see a shift in the way the narrative takes you forward, especially in the last segment, which is called the Uttarakanda. There are many historians who believe that the Uttarakanda, which is the last segment, was written significantly later in time compared to the rest of the Ramayana. That is at least 1,000 years or more later, because that is the segment of the Ramayana where you will actually see a very visible and stark shift from a society that does have some rules, but it's also open and accepting, to a society that becomes really patriarchal in its viewpoint. And that was a really fascinating shift to see, because as people used to narrate the Ramayana and then it went on and on for centuries, it started to take on the meaning of the time. It started to take on the morality of the time. A very good example that Bibek Debroy gives in the introduction is about the scene is during the time when Sita gets abducted. So in the really ancient versions, there is a section when Sita gets abducted by Ravana, and in the really old edition of the Ramayana, Sita takes off her upper garment, which covers her breasts, and she throws it on the floor, so that the trail of her clothes can be followed by Rama and Lakshmana when they are trying to track her to find her and save her. Because at that time, clothes weren't really considered to be a sign of the modest woman, the feminine woman, the ideal woman. If you look at ancient India, or rather even just pre-colonial India, women would not wear blouse when they would wear saris, right? Blouse is basically like a kind of like a crop top type kind of a thing, which you wear underneath your sari so that your arms and your chest are covered. Now, pre-colonial times, we would never wear blouse with a sari. The sari would just be a single garment that would wrap across the chest, but our arms and neck would be bare. Blouse was introduced as a garment by the Victorian rulers when they came to colonize India, because it was the Victorian belief that a good woman would never showcase her chest, her hands, or her face. So a good woman would not do that. So in the ancient Ramayana, you can see that when Sita takes off her upper garment and throws, so essentially she's naked from the neck down up to the waist. It shows about how the concept of a good woman and the kind of clothing she wore was never related to each other. Now fast forward a few centuries, maybe even a millennia, and in the critical edition, in these three books, you don't see Sita removing her upper garment, rather she throws her jewelry, which once again speaks to how the time has evolved, or rather time has moved forward. Morality, the definition of morality has changed, and so has the association between women and the clothes that they wear, right? Again, even then, it's not exactly a blouse. The upper garment was something else, but still, you see a shift between how people are, how the character's behavior has been modeled after the morality of the time. So that is something that I really enjoyed learning about, how the shifts in morality were modeled onto the characters and how the narratives changed as well. And so if you look at other interpretations, other songs and ballads written much later, for example, in the 13th century, 14th century AD, going right up to the 19th, 20th century, you will really see a shift in the way the Ramayana has been written, has been translated, has been interpreted, and it's really amazing to sort of know and really learn about it, right? So yeah, I know this I don't know if I'd call this a book review, but I had a lot of fun talking to you about this. This book is, like I said, the first book in the Valmiki Ramayana. and it covers the Balakanda, which is about the growing up childhood years of Rama, and the Ayodhya Kanda during the before Rama, Lakshmana, Sita are exiled. That's the Kanda that this book covers. This one, which is the second in the lot, which covers Aranya Kanda, which is the time when they were in the forest. Kishkinda Kanda, which talks of when after Sita has been kidnapped, the heroes, they visit Kishkinda, where the Vanaras or the ape men are, and who help them find Sita. So this Kanda is all about the relationship that Rama and Lakshmana develop with the Vanaras. And then there's Sundara Kanda, wherein we look at the search for Sita amidst forests and oceans, and this one, which is the final book in the series, and which covers the Yuddha Kanda, which is the war wherein Rama and Ravana fight. It's one of the largest sections in the entire Ramayana, and it's replete with war descriptions. And finally, the Uttara Kanda, which happens after Sita has been rescued, and what happens until the end of the Ramayana, until Rama dies. So yeah, these three books are absolutely phenomenal. If you want to read the Ramayana, if you already read the Ramayana in non-critical editions, just like I said, the Ramayana by Rajgopalacharya, I think I do have his book. Hold on. Yep. So this one, I'm sorry, it's kind of torn. I've had this since I was a child. So this is the book I would recommend to anyone who wants to start reading the Ramayana. If you are outside of Indian culture, or even if you are within the culture but you don't really know the Ramayana really well, then this is a good book to start, because it's very small and it really condenses what you learn in all three in a very simple way. It's basically designed for kids to get acquainted with it, but I really love this, and I always have this with me. So yeah, once you read that, then you can go in for these three. Alright, thank you so much for watching. I had a lot of fun talking to you about this. And yeah, if you have read Bibek Debroy's translation of the critical edition of the Ramayana, please do let me know what you think of the books. And if you haven't read them yet, let me know if you are planning to. Alright, I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye bye.